Gray light filtered through the narrow windows of Ironwood State Prison, as though even the sun was hesitant to illuminate the events unfolding within. Guards patrolled the corridors in a methodical rhythm, their footsteps echoing against concrete walls painted in a dull institutional blue. Leonard Len Jackson lay shackled to a steel bed in the secure wing. A single bulb overhead revealed the etched lines of exhaustion on his face. He had slept little in the past week. At sunrise, prison officials would move him to the final cell, a sterile chamber adjacent to the execution room. 2 hours after that, they planned to administer the lethal injection. No friends, no family, only the occasional visit from Reverend Morris. The prison chaplain had brightened Lynn's last few weeks. Yet he maintained one enduring wish. "I'd like to see Eclipse before I die," he repeated to the guard who stood outside his cell. Eclipse was his dog, a German shepherd he had adopted 3 years before the arrest. Len had loved that dog more than life itself. Mara Batista, the warden, stepped into view. Her posture was stiff, but not unkind. "Jackson, final requests are subject to approval. Bringing an animal onto prison grounds isn't standard. We don't even know where the dog is." "I do," Len interrupted. His voice sounded scratchy, even to his own ears. "Eclipse has been with Helen Griggs, my fiancée, before all this. She still has him, as far as I know." He tried to keep his tone neutral, but the ache in his throat betrayed him. "Please, warden, if there's any mercy left, let me see Eclipse." She eyed him with sympathy that she tried to cloak behind the usual protocol. "I'll see what I can do, but don't get your hopes up." Len nodded. He was too tired to fight or beg. In truth, he still clung to a thread of defiance, a refusal to accept that he had murdered anyone. For 5 years, Len had shouted his innocence to anyone who would listen. After multiple appeals, no one believed him, except perhaps Reverend Morris, who admitted doubt on more than one occasion. As the warden departed, Len heard conversation outside. Another protest forming. One guard said, "Half of them think he's guilty as sin. The other half want the death penalty abolished entirely." Len shut his eyes. It didn't matter what outsiders believed. In a few hours, the needle would do its grim work. Easing himself off the bunk, he stood and felt chains clink around his ankles. With every shift of his weight, they rattled. He walked to the small window, a high rectangular slit, and tried to see the sky. A watery band of light was all that showed. Dawn was still weak, but its pinkish hue spread across the horizon. It reminded him painfully of the early mornings he used to spend walking Eclipse through the vacant streets of Redwood City. For a moment, Len could almost feel Eclipse pulling on the leash, see the German shepherd's tail wagging excitedly as they set off for the park. He recalled how the dog would run circles around him, prompting strangers to smile. Some even asked, "You train him yourself?" Proudly, Len would answer, "Yes." The German shepherd was brilliant, eager to please. Eclipse had been more than a pet. He'd been a lifeline. A guard knocked on the door. "Jack, time to go. They're moving you to the final holding cell. Warden wants you prepped." Len swallowed. "Am I getting my last wish?" he asked through the steel bars. The guard avoided his gaze. "All I know is they're checking with the Department of Corrections. Don't hold your breath." Nodding, Len turned around and silently offered his wrists for the cuffs. He was used to it by now. After so many years of confinement, the mechanical click of metal on metal felt almost routine. "Let's move," the guard said. Len cast one final look at that stingy band of morning light, wondering if he'd ever see the sun fully break over the horizon again. Helen Griggs parked her pickup truck outside the small townhouse she now rented. It was just after 6:00 a.m., and she had been awake all night. The swirling anxiety in her chest had started ever since she saw the news broadcast. Leonard Jackson's execution was scheduled for that morning. Inside the townhouse, Eclipse lay curled on a dog bed with patches of fur that were a bit fluffier than usual for a German shepherd his age. At the sound of Helen's footsteps, he lifted his head. His ears perked up. Eclipse had not seen Len since the trial 5 years ago. Helen's heart clenched at the sight of the dog's alert gaze. Eclipse was all that remained of the life she and Len had started building. An engagement ring, wedding invitations, half-rest an apartment they were about to move into. Then everything shattered the night police found Len near the murder scene and pinned the blame on him. She crouched and stroked Eclipse's head. "You miss him, don't you? I know you do." Despite everything, she never doubted Len's innocence. The evidence had pointed in bizarre ways. A partial fingerprint on a weapon, unconfirmed sightings from questionable witnesses, and an alleged financial motive that never made sense. But a convincingly delivered prosecution sealed Len's fate. She had spent years trying to gain traction on an appeal to no avail. Helen stood up, her eyes drifting to the pile of mail on her kitchen table. She had to remind herself, today was the day Len was set to die by lethal injection. She'd pleaded with the new district attorney to re-examine the case. She'd tried contacting journalists. Nothing had worked. Her phone buzzed. Startled, she snatched it. The number was from Ironwood Prison. "Hello, Miss Griggs," a woman asked. The voice was calm. Official. "Warden Batista here. I'm calling about Leonard Jackson's final request." Helen's skin prickled. "Is there any change? I heard the governor might." "I'm sorry." Batista cut in. No stays or delays. The execution will move forward, but Mr. Jackson has requested to see his dog, Eclipse, one last time. He says, Eclipse is in your care. Helen nearly dropped the phone. He still wants to see Eclipse. Yes, we've never done this before, but I received conditional approval from the Department of Corrections. We're short on time, though. The warden's side. We need you and the dog here within 90 minutes, or it won't happen. Helen's pulse thudded in her ears. I'll bring him. Absolutely. We'll leave in 5 minutes. She hung up and stared at Eclipse, who was now standing tail-wagging because she was clearly excited, and dogs sensed that. But Helen also saw the apprehension in his eyes, maybe picking up on her anxiety. She tried to summon some courage. Come on, boy. Let's go see Len. For a moment, her voice wavered. She forced a brittle smile, knowing that no matter how impossible it felt, she had to do this. Helen quickly threw on a coat, grabbed Eclipse's leash, and guided him into the truck. This was everything Len had left, one final connection to a world that had once offered them both a promise of happiness. As she reversed out of the driveway, Helen felt the gnawing sense that she was driving into the darkest day of her life. The engine hummed as she sped toward Ironwood Prison, pushing the speed limit on mostly empty roads. Dawn was brightening the eastern sky. A swirl of pink and orange tinted the clouds. She risked a glance at Eclipse in the rear seat. The German shepherd stared out the window occasionally, letting out a soft whine. It was as if he, too, sensed the gravity of what awaited them. Her phone kept buzzing. Calls from friends, maybe from people who saw the news. She ignored them. Right now, only one thing mattered, honoring Len's request. It haunted her that she might arrive to find they were too late, or that something else had gone wrong. What if the warden reversed her decision at the last minute, or the dog wasn't permitted due to a technicality? Helen gripped the wheel harder. "Hold on, Len," she murmured. "Just hold on a little longer." Traffic lights gave her mostly green signals, as if the universe offered some small grace. She approached the tall fences and barbed wire surrounding Ironwood Prison, with a cold dread in her stomach. Two sets of gates parted slowly, controlled by watchful guards in a booth. When she finally pulled up, a correctional officer approached. Helen rolled down the window. "I'm here for Leonard Jackson's final request," she said, her voice trembling. "I have his dog, Eclipse." The officer checked a clipboard and waved her through. He directed her to a side entrance. She parked the truck. "Wait here," the officer said, "until we confirm everything inside." Helen reached back and gave Eclipse a comforting pat. "Just a little longer, boy. You'll see him soon," she whispered. Eclipse pressed his muzzle into her hand, as if to say he understood. She closed her eyes, imagining what it would be like to stand in front of Lynn again. How gaunt would he look? Would he still have that small dimple in his left cheek when he tried to smile? Would he still smell like the aftershave he used? Helen realized tears were streaming down her face. She wiped them hurriedly. Right now, she had to stay strong for Lynn's sake. And for a clip. Then the door to the administrative wing opened, and a different guard emerged, signaling her to come. This was it. Anton Delacqua adjusted the knot of his tie in front of a mirror that reflected a man on the verge of retirement. His salt and pepper hair was cropped short, and his sharp hazel eyes betrayed a lifetime of secrets. For 3 decades he served as a detective. Now, with a gold watch around the corner, he'd been saddled with a regret that didn't let him sleep well at night. For 5 years, a case had been gnawing at him. Len Jackson's murder conviction. Anton was the detective who led the investigation that put Lynn on death row. Back then, the evidence had seemed open and shut. Partial fingerprints on the murder weapon, a suspicious bank deposit near the time of the victim's death, and ambiguous eyewitness accounts that placed Lynn at the scene. But in the last 2 years, Anton's old partner had confided doubts. Something about the way certain testimonies were coached, how the victim's history vanished from official records, how certain digital traces were never pursued. The partner claimed the puzzle was never truly solved or possibly rigged. The city believed Anton to be a hero detective, a man of unwavering justice. But as Len's execution date neared, Anton found himself visiting the dusty archives of the county courthouse at odd hours. He reread transcripts, rewatched interrogation videos. Each time, details pricked at his conscience. The timeline didn't perfectly align. The victim, a businessman named Raymond Conincade, had a host of enemies, some with stronger motives than Len. And that suspicious bank deposit in Len's account, it was never fully tracked to a source. The prosecution claimed it was hush money for the murder, but no origin proof existed. Anton's cell phone chirped, snapping him back to the present. He read the text. Jackson's final appeal was denied. Execution set for 9:04 a.m. If there's anything left to do, do it now. The message came from a friend still inside the district attorney's office. A sense of dread tugged at Anton. He had considered stepping forward but never mustered the nerve. He'd tried quietly asking higher-ups to recheck the forensics. They brushed him off. For them, the conviction was a victory, a done deal. The city's justice system saw an open and shut case with a dangerous man locked away. After all, some of the biggest players in local government were Consincade's cronies. Consincade had been a real estate magnate with money in every politician's pocket. They mourned him as a saint, ignoring any possible unsavory side ventures he ran. The city wanted a scapegoat, and Len Jackson fit the role. Now, standing alone in his modest bedroom, Anton checked his watch. 7:20 a.m. He picked up a phone. He rarely used a prepaid device purchased for privacy. He dialed a number from memory. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. "Yeah," came a voice, low and slightly gruff. "It's Delacqua. Listen, I need you to do me a favor. We don't have much time. The call was to a contact who specialized in data retrieval. If any digital footprints existed that pointed away from Len's guilt, this person could find them. Perhaps it was a feeble last-ditch attempt, but Anton couldn't let this day pass without trying everything. If Len was executed, the detective wanted to know he'd done all he could to uncover the truth. Anton slid a gun into a leather holster beneath his jacket. Not that he expected a firefight, but old habits died hard. Driving his unmarked sedan, he left behind the quiet suburban street. The sky overhead remained overcast, smothering the city in a gray haze. As he maneuvered through morning traffic, memories of the investigation flooded his mind. He recalled the day he interviewed Len, a day that should have been routine. The suspect had looked genuinely bewildered, even frightened. "I didn't do this," Len had insisted, with a calmness that was either the mark of a psychopath or an innocent man who believed in fairness. Over the years, Anton had interrogated all kinds of criminals. Len's demeanor never quite matched the hardened or deceptive type. Pulling into a public library lot, he found the building still closed. Good. The library's Wi-Fi extended to the parking area, offering a discreet place for him to upload and download files to the digital sleuth on the other end of his phone. With measured haste, he transferred copies of the case records from a flash drive. He had no illusions. This might be too little too late. While he waited for his contact to confirm receipt, Anton thought about the Jackson he'd met. No prior record, honorable discharge from the military, a stable job at a security firm. Then the abrupt downfall. The more Anton replayed it, the more it stank of a setup. But was there a single piece of undiscovered evidence that might blow the case open? His phone vibrated. Received. "Give me an hour." That was the text. Anton typed back quickly. "We don't have an hour. Execution at 9. Hurry." He started the car again, heading toward the county courthouse. If by some miracle a piece of evidence surfaced that proved Len's innocence, Anton needed to be the one handing it to the DA or the warden. It was a slim chance, but better than helplessly standing by. The city's skyline appeared in the distance, a cluster of glass and steel glinting in subdued morning light. The same city that once hailed him as a top detective. As the minutes ticked by, Anton prayed this Hail Mary would yield something, anything, to cast doubt on the conviction. He also had a second plan in mind, a personal mission. If no digital evidence emerged, he would walk into Ironwood Prison himself, find the warden, and say, "I have reasonable suspicion that we got the wrong man." It might lead to his own professional disgrace, even potential legal trouble for withholding doubts for so long. But perhaps it could buy a stay of execution or open a last-minute hearing. Time was slipping through his fingers. Anton pressed the gas pedal harder, weaving around slow cars. In the distance, the sky brightened. The clouds parted, letting a pale beam of sun break through. The detective interpreted that as a sign, faint hope in a grim situation. If that hope failed him, if the system wouldn't budge, then all he'd have left was the knowledge that he tried to save an innocent man, even if it was far too late. Len Jackson was led through a series of windowless hallways until he reached the final holding cell. It was a small antiseptic space with white tiled walls and a glaring fluorescent light overhead. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and fear. A single observation window looked out onto the corridor, allowing guards to watch his every move. A female correctional officer, Garcia, removed his handcuffs through the door slot, giving him a momentary feeling of relief. She set down a paper bag containing the meager last meal he'd requested, a cheeseburger with extra pickles and a soda. Not because he was hungry, but because he remembered sharing a similar fast food meal with Helen the day he adopted Eclipse. Garcia offered a stilted nod. "You'll be prepped in about 30 minutes. If the warden says yes, you'll see your dog." Her voice softened. She clearly was not comfortable carrying out an execution, but duty overshadowed her personal qualms. "Thank you," Len said, picking up the burger. He didn't unwrap it. The smell alone brought back a wave of nostalgia. Each memory was like a glass shard, slivers of a life stolen from him. He considered eating, but his stomach clenched with dread. He took a sip of soda, and then placed it aside. Sitting on the narrow bunk, he stared at the opposite wall. He wondered if Eclipse would even recognize him. Maybe the German Shepherd had moved on. 5 years was a long time. Yet a surge of hope fluttered in his chest. If the warden had made that call to Helen, maybe A was on his way. Maybe in these last moments Len could feel that unconditional love once more. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Then, unbelievably, the door opened. Warden Batista entered first, her expression tense. Behind her stood Helen, holding Eclipse's leash. The moment the dog saw Len, his entire body went rigid. Eclipse let out a single loud bark, followed by a flurry of frantic tail wagging. Len's breath caught. Eclipse bounded forward. The dog's nails clacked on the tile floor as he tried to leap onto the bunk. He let out a series of excited barks that Len recognized. Half yelp, half cry, something the German Shepherd always did when overjoyed. A guard was about to hold the dog back, but Batista waved him off. Len, tears streaming, dropped to his knees on the floor. "Hey, buddy," he whispered, hugging Eclipse around the neck. The German Shepherd was bigger now, fur fluffier. Eclipse's muzzle had a faint white streak that hadn't been there 5 years ago. But his eyes, that striking ice blue, shone with the same adoration Len remembered. Helen stood by the doorway, trembling. Len looked up at her. "Helen," he murmured. No words could suffice. In a single glance, he saw all the pain she had endured on his behalf. Visits she was likely forced to end. The heartbreak of losing a life they'd planned together. I tried to stop this," Helen whispered. "I begged them to look again. No one would listen. I'm sorry, Len." He shook his head. "Don't. You did more than anyone." Warden Batista cleared her throat. "We have 15 minutes, she said, sounding far more gentle than Len had heard from her before. "The chaplain will come afterward, and then the doctor." "I'm sorry, Jackson." Len tried to swallow the lump in his throat. "I appreciate you letting me see him," he managed to say. Helen knelt on the other side of Eclipse, who was busy licking Len's face. She reached out, and Len grasped her hand. For a moment, they simply absorbed the reality of being in the same room after so long. Neither had the words to convey that mixture of heartbreak and longing. "He's still yours," Helen said softly. "I never rehomed him, even though people told me it was best to move on." Len buried his face in Eclipse's fur, inhaling that warm, doggy smell that used to greet him at the door after a long shift at work. The hush in the room felt like a calm eye in the hurricane swirling outside, crowds protesting a lethal injection prepared. Yet here, for these few moments, love blossomed in raw, undeniable form. 15 minutes, repeated Batista, gently stepping back toward the corridor. "Then it's time." Helen blinked rapidly. "I'll wait outside." She gave Len's shoulder a squeeze. I'll be here," until her voice cracked. She rose, hugging herself as she exited. The door shut behind her. Len was alone with Eclipse, under the watchful eye of the warden and a guard behind glass. But it felt like solitude, a stolen oasis of humanity. The German Shepherd nuzzled him with unstoppable affection, occasionally whining and pawing at Len's arms. Len stroked behind Eclipse's ears, tears falling freely. "I never stopped loving you, boy," he said. "Never stopped dreaming about walking you along Redwood Creek or teaching you new tricks. You kept me going." Every time I thought about, he hesitated, remembering dark nights when thoughts of suicide had loomed. "You gave me something to hold on to." Eclipse licked at Len's cheek, a soft, comforting gesture. The dog couldn't possibly understand the intricacies of wrongful conviction or last appeals, but Eclipse knew Len was hurting. That was enough. Len heard a brief knock. Time was slipping away. Each second felt like a drop of water in a desert precious and scarce. He buried his hand in Eclipse's thick ruff. "It's not fair," he murmured. "5 years gone, I never got to prove." His throat closed. For the 100th time, he thought I didn't kill Raymond Consincade. No matter how many times he repeated the words, no matter how passionately he insisted, the courts never believed him. He finally rose to his feet and placed both hands on Eclipse's cheeks. The dog gazed up, ears perked, as if memorizing Len's face. "I love you," Len managed to say. Then, in a gesture he never wanted to make, he stood back, expecting that a guard would come for Eclipse. To his surprise, the warden's voice came through the speaker. "Baptiste." "Jackson, your time is up, but would you like Eclipse to remain until the chaplain arrives? I can permit him inside for a few more minutes, if you want him by your side." Len's chest constricted. I'd be grateful, ma'am." The warden's tone softened. "All right. But only until the chaplain. Then we have to escort the dog out. Protocol." Len sank back onto the bunk, guiding Eclipse to sit beside him. A few minutes more. He felt gratitude that came with an undercurrent of disbelief. This was the last peaceful moment he'd ever get with the dog he loved, more than his own life. He closed his eyes. If this was his final memory, at least it would be one worth clinging to in his last conscious seconds. Outside the final holding cell, Helen leaned against the wall, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She could hear nothing except distant murmurs from the administrative hallway. Occasionally, an echo of footsteps resonated. Guards, doctors, 1,000 indifferent employees going about their day. A sudden voice startled her. "Miss Griggs!" It was a man's baritone, tinged with age and regret. She looked up to find a tall man with salt and pepper hair, wearing a dark suit. He moved with the cautious confidence of someone used to carrying authority. "My name is Anton Delacroix," he said, extending a hand. "I was the detective on Leonard Jackson's case." Helen stiffened. "Why would you come now? Len has minutes, maybe an hour left. Isn't it too late?" He pursed his lips. "That's exactly why I'm here. I think we made a mistake." Helen's throat tightened. "You think you didn't say anything for 5 years?" Delacroix sighed. "I've suspected for 2. I tried to pursue leads, but the department wasn't interested. And he glanced at the floor, shame rising in his cheeks. "I hesitated. Didn't want to dismantle my own case without ironclad evidence." She clenched her fists, but her tiredness, her heartbreak overshadowed anger. "We have, half an hour until the lethal injection. If you're telling me this now, what can you possibly do?" He pointed to his phone. "I have a contact analyzing digital footprints from the victim's life, plus undisclosed leads that never made it to trial. I'm hoping for a miracle, some proof to at least stay the execution," he swallowed. "The real question is whether the warden will delay the procedure if I show up with suspicion." Helen forced down a surge of emotion. "Len deserves that chance," she whispered. "He's innocent. I've always known." Delacroix gave a tiny nod. "I believe he is too. Let me speak to Warden Batista." Helen followed Delqua down the corridor. She thought about the horrors Len had endured isolated on death row, called a murderer by everyone who once respected him. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" She wanted to scream, but she kept her focus on the present. Time was not on their side. The warden stood near a glass-paneled door leading to a small administrative office. She was flipping through documents on a clipboard. Delqua approached, introduced himself. Batista's face drew into a stern line. "You have information that could affect this execution. Are you aware how close we are to the appointed time?" Delqua nodded vigorously. "Ma'am, I do. We might be dealing with manipulated evidence. If so, we cannot proceed with an irreversible sentence. I beg you to at least request a short stay from the governor's office while I confirm new findings." Batista gave him a long, piercing stare. "Detective, I can't simply take your word for it. You realize the legal channels for a stay of execution require more than the personal doubts of an investigator. My contact is verifying digital files from the victim's internal finances. Raymond Concade. If we find something that ties the real murder to someone else, or proves Len was set up, can you justify a stay?" She rubbed her temples. "I can forward your claim to the Department of Corrections and the Governor's legal counsel, but they'll want documented evidence. If you have anything short of that, it's hearsay." At that moment, a prison guard hurried up to the warden. "Ma'am, phone call for you. The DA's office." Batista frowned. Perfect timing or terrible timing? She excused herself. Helen stepped closer to Delqua, her voice low. "What if the phone call is about some new info?" He exhaled. "I can only hope. If not, I have to do whatever it takes. Start shouting about coerced witnesses, chain of custody errors. Even if it's not bulletproof, it might cause enough of a ruckus for a judge to delay the injection." Helen grabbed his arm, eyes desperate. "Please, if there's even a 1% chance, we can't just let them kill him. He's an innocent man." She heard an urgent beep from Delqua's phone. He checked a text message. Suddenly his features brightened, then turned serious. "They found something," he said, voice trembling. "My contact says Kincaid's bank accounts had large sums moving around the time of the murder, all masked through shell corporations, possibly hush money or a frame. They're sending me the files right now." Helen felt faint. That might be enough to prove Len didn't have a motive, or that someone else was orchestrating everything. Delqua grimaced. "I need to see the details. Might show Len was framed, or at least that Concade's murder was tied to bigger financial crimes. The question is, can we get the warden to stop the execution for a real look at the evidence? They didn't have to wait long for an answer." Batista returned, her complexion pale, as though she'd just received terrible news. "Detective Delqua, Miss Griggs, there's a possibility the DA might consider a temporary stay if we present credible evidence of misconduct, but everything must go through the governor's chain." Delqua showed Batista the messages on his phone. "Let me forward these documents to your office right now." Batista's jaw tightened. "Send it. I'll personally call the governor's staff." Helen's eyes welled with cautious hope. "We don't have much time, do we?" Batista said nothing, but motioned for them to follow. They headed to her office, where a fax machine computer and phone lines were at her disposal. Delqua typed with frantic speed, transmitting data. Batista was already on the phone, voice tense. "Yes, Governor's Council. I'm looking at new evidence that might suggest a wrongful conviction. We can't proceed until we confirm or deny these claims." Helen hovered near the door, heart pounding. Could this really happen? She pictured Len in that tiny cell, possibly saying goodbye to Eclipse for the last time. She looked at Delqua, whose rigid posture betrayed guilt and desperation in equal measure. The next 10 minutes stretched into an agonizing silence. Finally, Batista hung up the phone. They need more, but they'll grant a 2-hour postponement for the lethal injection if we can produce a credible lead. Helen blinked. Only 2 hours? That's better than nothing, Delacroix said quietly. It buys us time. If we can confirm or expand on these transactions, maybe link them to a murder for higher angle, we can request a full stay. Batista's shoulders sagged in relief, though her expression remained grim. We have to keep this from the press for now. If we cause a stir before the governor's official decree, we risk chaos. Helen breathed out a wave of hope crashing over her, so Len might not die this morning. Batista turned to her. If this evidence proves even partial exoneration, I'll personally stop it. But everything hinges on what your contact uncovers in the next 90 minutes. Helen nodded, tears brimming. She prayed that it wasn't all a cruel cosmic joke, that the damning case built against Len would finally break apart. Because if it didn't, her final memory of him would be the handshake, the tears, and watching him walk out of this world labeled as a murderer.